we need to talk about the next, unfortunately, important part of what's going on today, and that's the fact that welfare fraud is something that our government cares a lot about. Now, why does our government care a lot about welfare fraud? Well, to put it simply, if they can place blame on people who don't have a whole lot of money or power, they can divert blame away from people who actually have money and power. Oh, and also influence. You know, the Epstein class. But before we talk about them, let's go ahead and take a look at the fan art section. This one is from Chaotic Entity Comics, and they said I drew this a while ago. Suris with an umbrella. You know what? I get very big Enna vibes out of this, and I am A-okay with that. Thank you very much for the fan art submission. If you want your fan art to be shown in a future video, then drop it into the fan art section like Chaotic Entity did, and I will get to it and show it to everybody here on stream. That said, like I said, we have to talk about the Vice President, everybody, and not just the Vice President, but specifically the Vice President talking about fraud, and, well, not just him as well. More than just him.
Our laws. And the amount that has been fleeced from us is in the hundreds of billions of dollars. I believe, based on what I've seen and what I've heard, is that we could balance the federal budget if the only dollars that went out of the Treasury went to individuals who were properly, lawfully, correctly eligible to receive them. So,
he's talking about a thing called means testing. Said, why is the Vice President talking about Nosferatu? Because Stephen Miller's a ghoul, and JD Vance loves two things more than his wife: couches and old man dick. Anyway, the reason that they are doing this, the reason that they're talking about this, is because means testing is a method that the government loves to use so that people do not have access to resources. It is a way to sell the idea that they are going to spend less on resources by means testing them, but the means testing costs more money than just giving the resources away. But by using means testing, they can both get votes from Republicans who want us to spend less money. So even though in reality they are spending more money, they can make the case that they are spending less money. You ever thought it was weird why we managed to never be able to balance our budget when a Republican's in office, but when a Democrat's in office, we always seem to do a lot better at balancing that budget? It's because they never actually do anything to actually help the budget. And, well, we're going to finish this part of the video, but there's something that I want you to listen to very specifically in this.
And that ultimately is going to be what we have to do as a country. In the meantime, because of the Vice President's leadership, you are seeing the most muscular, robust, aggressive, dedicated, determined, and speedy effort to shut down criminal fraud that has not only ever occurred in the history of this.
You notice every single adjective he used was some version of strong man, good, her.
This country, but in any developed nation. So thank you.
Okay. So, what part did I want you to pay attention to? Well, it's this part in the beginning that Stephen Miller was saying. Listen to what he says.
Not abiding by our laws, and the amount that has been fleeced from us is in the hundreds of billions of dollars. I believe, based on what I've seen.
So, that's hundreds of billions of dollars in welfare fraud. And that's what Nick Sorter wants you to believe that he is saying as well. He says the scale of welfare fraud is so massive that eliminating it alone could balance the entire federal budget. Now, you and I both know that Nick Sorter is an idiot because we've covered him many times on this channel, mostly on the Watering Hole with Vice Rhino, rest in peace. And the reason that he wants to sell this idea to you is because it's very easy to pretend that our problems as a country stem from somebody else. And it lets you do a couple of things. Primarily, it allows you to have no accountability as a country. If we can pretend, if we can convince ourselves that as a country, we are not the ones responsible for the bad things that have befallen us. It is actually some kind of undisclosed other who has not only raped our country, but has also influenced it from within and invaded it. Then we can rally a bunch of people against those people. And it turns out, if you can distract the people in a country enough, they don't tend to do a whole lot to, you know, stop your regime from doing stupid shit. And, well, the reason that I mentioned that, there is a thing that fascist countries, any authoritarian country has used for years, and it is the idea of the other so that you are distracted and so that you are united. It is very, very easy, ridiculously easy, to unite a group of people not in a common cause, but against a common enemy. Dorita Dave says squirrel. So the primary reason that they are doing this, like I said, is because if they can offload the responsibility to somebody else, then it is easier for them to work without any form of accountability. And secondly, it is simply easier logistically to rally people together against a common enemy, even if that common enemy doesn't really exist. Now, it's really, really funny that they would mention that there's hundreds of billions of fraud, and that would balance out the entire federal budget. Because I was doing a little bit of research before this episode, and it turns out that we are a few trillion, actually, in debt. So hundreds of billions of dollars wouldn't balance our books at all. Not even in the slightest. So this shit goes back to Reagan's mythical welfare queens. Yep, it's the welfare queen shit all over again. Compared to a federal revenue of $3.11 trillion, federal revenue has increased by $210 billion. The revenue has increased. Our debt is still fucked. Completely fucked. Entirely fucked. Now, wouldn't it be really funny if it turned out that the amount of welfare fraud that is happening in the country wouldn't actually equal to the number that Stephen Miller says that it does in the first place? I mean, I'm sure that wouldn't undermine their entire argument. I'm sure it wouldn't mean anything for their entire argument. But as it turns out, I've also been doing some reading over here, over at NPR, and it looks like we actually have a pretty decent handle on how much welfare fraud is happening, at least in a good estimate. So, fun fact, in order to get to $100 billion, or at least a few $100 billion, Stephen Miller has to be fudging the numbers quite a bit. Because when he mentions welfare fraud being responsible for that much of the fraud in the United States, well, not only do we need a couple trillion to actually balance our budget, but if we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars, well, that's the number most associated at the high end for all fraud within the government, not welfare fraud. Welfare fraud makes up a percentage within there. In fact, actually, let's see here. State agencies attempted to collect $54 million in overpayments resulting from the receding traffic and recipient application fraud. Hundreds of billions of dollars in fraud loss happen across the entire federal government. And while President Trump takes Governor Walz to task for the fraud losses in Minnesota, it should be noted that the Trump admin is reportedly looking to remove protections for U.S. government whistleblowers to help uncover said fraud. This means that the hundreds of millions of dollars in fraud loss across the entire federal government will just balloon more and more because the whistleblower protections for us to discover fraud in the first place go out the window. Now, it makes sense. It makes perfect sense that we'd be dealing with this shit, right? Because, like, realistically, remember that this is the government. Our government is the government that has spent a lot of time trying to convince you that Doge was necessary, that it can cut anything that it needs. Anything can be considered viable chaff to take away so that we can make the government more lean and efficient. Now, ignore the fact that more people get audited by the IRS when the IRS has less money to operate. Ignore the fact that we end up having more fraud in our government when we have fewer people who can whistleblow against fraud. Ignore the fact that this is the same government trying to take advocacy organizations to task because they had money going to paid informants in hate groups so that we could report on those hate groups and send that information to the FBI. Nope. We need to cut all of that out. Everything that makes our country function, all of it can be thrown by the wayside as long as we address the welfare fraud. You know, the welfare fraud that doesn't account for multiple hundreds of billions of dollars like Stephen Miller suggests, because at the low end, all government fraud, all of it accounts for a little over 200 billion. So the number that Stephen Miller is handing us cannot be true. All data suggests that it's not. So to curse you, Twitch, for crashing on me, Ansel says I'm getting really more bad ideas, not that I would be able to act on anything. So also making sure people eat is fraud, don't you know? Also, we do a lot of pontificating about welfare fraud, pretending that the point of government welfare, let's talk about the SNAP program specifically. The SNAP program, or really any program at all that provides food to Americans, we pretend that that is a program that is meant to help Americans who are part of families who are in need. No, that's a fucking lie. No, see, the real reason that we actually had those programs in the first place is to subsidize our farm industries. So realistically, people who get mad about the idea of the welfare queen and want us to do more means testing, where we spend money on audits instead of spending money giving that money to people so they can eat, not only do we fuck over the people who can't eat, but we are also inadvertently fucking over the people in the dying farmland industry that is already struggling right now. Man, I love living in this country, don't you? Don't you love living in a country where not only can your president and your vice president lie to you about the numbers, but they can lie to you about damn near anything, and there is no way to hold any of them accountable at all. So, oh, you don't like welfare? So you hate farm? I mean, unironically, yes, if you do not like government welfare in the form of food subsidies for people, then you actually don't like farmers. You don't like the people who provide food to us in the United States. Sorry to say, Vosh would think that's a good thing. /silly. God damn it. Good thing I'm not Vosh. I'm too pink and slimy for that. Ay. Guys, convince Vosh to come on Third Space Arcade. Convince him to do that. Because he already told me in DMs he doesn't have the time. But, like, if enough of you bug him, he'll probably make the time. Maybe. Anyway, don't worry. We can trust JD Vance with everything. All of it.
As Andrew very ably pointed out, these are not victimless crimes. Sometimes the most vulnerable people in our community are the ones who suffer when we don't take fraud seriously. One of the cases that was part of Colin's series of indictments last week in Minnesota stood out to me, and I think highlights how particularly egregious some of these fraudsters can be. And it's a man who was supposed to be providing services to allow elderly people to live full and independent lives. And what happened instead is that the man who was supposed to provide these services, reimbursed by the Medicaid program, was providing nothing. No services, no help, no check-ins. And the very man, the vulnerable elderly man that he was supposed to be protecting and looking after, was reimbursed by the taxpayer in order to do exactly that. That man died. And one day before he died, after months of being neglected by the caretaker who was getting reimbursed by the American people, one day before he died, he submitted his final reimbursement for services he never provided for a man he never cared for.
So, what's going on here mechanically? Can any of you tell me in the comment section below what exactly is being utilized here to tug at your heartstrings? Or in the comment section, you could also tell people to subscribe to the channel, which you should already be doing anyway. Or you can even mention in the Twitch chat what mechanic is happening here, because I'm sure all of you who have been watching me long enough know exactly what mechanic is being utilized here. The mechanic is called the testimonial. Now, the purpose of the testimonial is specifically to tug at your heartstrings. You see, the really nasty thing about data is it tends to depersonalize things, and it tends to show that in terms of fraud, while fraud is bad, there is not enough of it happening to fix all of the problems, like they would say, like we went over already. And it ignores all of the people who actually do get helped, and it ignores the people who, if we implement means testing in order to make this fraud become less prevalent, less money can be spent on helping people in the first place, so inadvertently we end up helping fewer people, so everybody who wants us to be helping more people with welfare actually do not see more people helped. But ignoring all those mechanics, or ignoring all of that, the mechanic that's being shown to you is the testimonial. Because despite all of that data, human beings don't respond to data. They don't. Human beings never respond to data en masse. We respond to personal testimonials. We respond to personal stories. Think about it. Even on YouTube, people respond better and more quickly to some random person telling them they should be outraged about a thing that personally discriminated against them than they will anything involving a number. People respond to things that sound like they are happening to people, not statistics. Even though you and I both understand that statistics are just an abstraction of people, none of that matters in the grand scheme of things when we are talking about how people react to anything. We don't think about the abstraction. We think about the testimonial, because the testimonial can pull at our heartstrings. Let's say that 0.01%, or even less than that, of all cases of welfare were fraud. But if JD Vance were to ignore the other 99.9% of cases and just tell you the information about the moments that are fraud, he can paint the picture to you that only fraud is happening and that we need to do something about it really, really bad. Instead of recognizing that a certain amount of fraud is going to be the cost of doing business, because we will never, ever, ever be able to develop a system where everything flows perfectly, that cannot and will not happen. So instead of accepting that and trying to handle things on a case-to-case basis, trying to convince people that there's a broad, sweeping reform that is needed instead that will inadvertently cause people to lose access to things like healthcare, to things like food stamps, well, all of that's just gravy for JD Vance. He doesn't have to care about the people who lose access to these things. All he has to care about is that you heard the testimonial that made you think that he's the guy that can solve your problem, even if your problem is not happening to the scale such that it is important compared to anything else we could be focusing on. Now, I'm not sitting here trying to defend fraud. I think that would be very, very stupid. What I am saying is, human beings are human beings. And if you are willing to be the person that understands their psychology enough to use testimonials against them instead of using actual raw data and then lying about the numbers when you even skirt the idea of data, then maybe, possibly, you understand enough to also know that there is a non-zero amount of fraud that is going to happen irrespective of what you do. If you've ever worked retail, this is called shrinkage. If you've worked Walmart, and you've worked in management, then you know that there is a certain amount of shrinkage. Actually, this really works anywhere where you have a product. There is a certain amount of shrinkage that is not only accepted, but it is expected. Because the cost of doing business in a store is that a non-zero amount of things are going to disappear off your shelves. Now, the question always becomes, when you deal with shrinkage, is the shrinkage happening in numbers that are considered expected? But that is never going to be the conversation that JD Vance has with the American people. Because the conversation he has with the American people is always going to begin and end with whatever nightmarish scenario he can point out to you so that you feel like you really, 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 really need to vote for him and every other Republican in the future so that you can prevent a problem that actually doesn't really affect you all that much. Axo says, some of my only good memories of my mom is when okay, I'm not reading all that fucking shit. You could just say we went on the bus to the food bank while we were on welfare. Yes, the situation is sad, but those talks were some of my favorite times of the month. Yeah, I can see that. You see a silver lining when you're dealing with fucking poverty. So why would they do this? Well, politicians lie. That's really what it boils down to. Politicians lie because they need you to vote for them. And I feel like the fact that they are willing to lie, JD Vance has actually told you he's willing to lie, by the way, so that you will pay attention to him. He said it about the pets being eaten in Springfield, how he knew it was a lie when he said it, but he said it because people needed to pay attention to him. These people, if you want to use such a strong word to describe them, these people utilize lies so that you pay attention, so that you feel that there are problems that need to be addressed, and only they can address them. It's a way to manipulate your vote. Always has been. And because it's a way to manipulate your vote, maybe, just maybe, one of you, at least some of you, would recognize that there is a non-zero amount of power in your vote. Otherwise, dipshits like this wouldn't be trying every single day of every single night to either disenfranchise your vote or incentivize you to vote for them. That politicians lie? I'm shocked. I know, right? I know. Your flabbers are gasted. I get it. The reality is, JD Vance has something to sell you, and it's himself. And the only way you're going to buy JD Vance is if you feel like JD Vance is a necessary product that can be a solution to a problem you have. But I think the problem might actually just be JD Vance. Hey, you made it to the end. I want to give an extra thanks to the patrons who allow me to do this full time. I want to thank Aaron Rail, Astral, Britzkrieg, Jemshin, Poundini, Red Joker, Victoria, Jonas, Craig, Tarika, Fireshard, Smiling GM, John, Dren Hadamada, Creeper, Sagitta, you know I'm not saying that last part, Sylvie Snow, Valis of Seraph, Ottoman Angel, Rooster Rachel, and Fire Panda, who are all my $20 and up patrons.